Welcome back to your deep dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, pull out the key nuggets, really the most important bits, to help you get genuinely well informed. Today, we are plunging into, well, a pretty surprising and frankly quite significant shift in U.S. health policy, specifically around vaccines. And look, this isn't just any policy change. It's one that's been right at the heart of, gosh, decades of really intense public debate and, issues of trust. Our mission today really is to unpack this recent decision, the one by U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to mandate the removal of Thimerosal, that's the mercury-based preservative, from all U.S. vaccines. So we'll explore what Thimerosal actually is, why the specific decision is kicking up so much controversy, and maybe most importantly for you, what it could all mean for vaccine supply, both here in the U.S. and potentially globally.
Yeah, it's fascinating because this isn't just about one ingredient, is it? It's really a compelling look at how public health, scientific agreement or consensus, and well, these powerful forces, how they all intersect. These forces really shape policymaking, especially now in a world just flooded with information. And let's be honest, misinformation too. So yeah, let's dig in.
Okay, right. Let's unpack Thimerosal first. For those of you who follow the vaccine conversation, you've almost certainly heard the name. But what is it exactly? Fundamentally, it's an ethyl mercury-based compound. And historically, its job was to be a preservative in multi-dose vaccine vials.
Right, prevents contamination.
Exactly, and it's been around a long time. I mean, its use in vaccines goes back even before World War II. And maybe we should touch on why it was in those multi-dose vials.
Good point, yeah.
Imagine you're running a big vaccination campaign, maybe somewhere remote. You've got one vial, many patients. Every time a needle goes in, there's a small risk, right, of bacteria getting in. So Thimerosal acted like a safeguard. It stopped potentially dangerous contamination. It's something you don't usually need in single-dose shots.
And what's so compelling here is its history. It's been, well, let's call it tumultuous, especially public perception. I mean, it did this vital job for decades, but then its presence became this huge focus of controversy, which led to it being phased out, controversially, from most childhood vaccines back in the early 2000s. 1999 specifically.
1999.
And the official reason given then, almost identical to today, a precautionary measure.
And that initial phase out, the voluntary one, it didn't actually settle things down, did it?
Not at all. If anything, it seemed to add fuel to the fire.
Yeah, for years after that, especially post-99, Thimerosal became this central target for anti-vaccine activists, blaming it controversially for autism, other developmental issues.
But despite a complete lack of scientific proof for those claims, just wasn't there.
And our sources point out RFK Jr. himself wrote a book back in 2014 calling for, and this is a quote, the immediate removal of mercury from vaccines. So this isn't a new position for him.
Which brings us to a really critical point. Despite all this public concern, these activist campaigns, what does the science say? What has it consistently said? Well, health authorities across the board, FDA, CDC, WHO, you name it, for decades, they've unequivocally said Thimerosal is safe as a vaccine preservative. That previous removal you mentioned, it was explicitly called a precautionary measure to reduce overall mercury exposure in infants. It wasn't because the tiny amount in vaccines was proving dangerous. It was about minimizing any exposure if you could.
A subtle but important distinction.
Very. The key takeaway, scientifically speaking, evidence of harm from Thimerosal in vaccines just isn't there.
Okay, so let's fast forward to July 2025. Secretary Kennedy formalizes this decision. Require vaccine makers remove Thimerosal from all U.S. vaccines. And it's worth remembering, like you said, up till now, it was only about 5% of flu shots anyway, mostly those multi-dose vials. So this isn't a small adjustment. It's a very deliberate policy shift. And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The move follows a recommendation from a vaccine advisory panel, a newly convened panel, and the members of this panel, appointed by Kennedy himself.
Yeah, that's a key detail, isn't it? Because it does raise questions about let's say, the usual advisory process in public health. And if you look at how Secretary Kennedy is framing this, connecting it to the bigger picture, he calls it fulfilling a long overdue promise to protect our most vulnerable populations from unnecessary mercury exposure. He's also called it a precautionary and modernizing step. Very strong emphasis on safety, he said quite pointedly. Injecting any amount of mercury into children when safe, mercury-free alternatives exist defies common sense and public health responsibility. Today, we put safety first.
That framing is definitely central.
It really is. And this whole situation, this policy decision, it just perfectly highlights this tension we often see, right, between the established science, the peer-reviewed consensus on safety, and then, on the other side, strong public perception, often really amplified by determined activist campaigns. It's a tricky environment for policy folks.
Definitely.
And there's an intriguing bit of science here that often gets, well, lost in the noise. It's about the mercury itself. Thimerosal contains ethyl mercury. And the crucial thing is it has a very short half-life in the body. It gets processed and kicked out much faster than methyl mercury.
Which is the kind in fish.
Exactly, the kind in seafood. And this distinction, scientifically, it's huge.
Yeah.
But it gets conflated all the time in the public debate. Just to give you a sense of scale. The amount of ethyl mercury in a typical flu shot, maybe 25 micrograms, that's about half the methyl mercury you'd get from a standard 3-ounce can of tuna, which is around 40 micrograms.
Wow. Okay.
And the body handles these two forms totally differently, but public fear often lumps them together.
That really is a crucial distinction, isn't it? It makes you wonder how much of the fear comes from just misunderstanding that difference. Why does that conflation persist, despite the science? It's just amazing how this one point, this ingredient, used for decades, no proof of harm, how it's had such staying power as this, like, lightning rod for anti-vaccine arguments and misinformation.
Absolutely. And you even saw this tension, this balancing act, play out within the advisory panel itself. One panelist, for example, voiced this concern, saying something like, the risk of people avoiding the flu vaccine because they fear thimerosal might actually outweigh any risk from the ingredient itself.
That's a really powerful point.
It is, and it leads you to this critical question. When you take precautionary steps, even if they aren't scientifically backed, maybe driven by public pressure, how does that inadvertently affect overall vaccine confidence, vaccine uptake?
It's such a tricky balance for health officials, weighing these perceived risks, especially when they're loudly promoted, against actual public health results.
Precise.
Okay, so let's shift gears slightly. Let's talk about the process behind this decision. Because our sources suggest it was, well, unusual, not standard operating procedure. There's a whole story beneath the policy itself about how this came about, and it involves some pretty unconventional moves.
Right.
Back in June, there was this really dramatic step. Secretary Kennedy basically dismantled the existing advisory structure. He fired all 17 members of the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP.
And ACIP is, it's a critical body. They provide the independent scientific recommendations.
Yeah.
A key link in the whole vaccine chain.
Absolutely. And then he replaced them with 8 hand-picked allies, including, notably, one person directly from the anti-vaccine movement.
And we should add, one of those appointees later dropped out after a conflict of interest review.
Right. So this immediate total replacement of a long-standing scientific advisory body, it's highly unusual, a major departure from how things are normally done.
And this new panel then votes 5-1, one abstention, to remove thimerosal. But what's really concerning at the process, or at least raises eyebrows, is that this vote came after a presentation from Lynn Redwood. She's a former leader of the World Mercury Project.
Which was the predecessor to Kennedy's own group, Children's Health Defense.
Exactly. And adding to the, let's say, irregularities, her presentation actually had to be updated during the process because it was found to contain a link to a study that, well, simply didn't exist.
That doesn't exactly inspire confidence in the information quality, does it, for a panel making major policy recommendations?
Not really. And there's another detail from the sources that's quite unsettling. Apparently, a presentation prepared by career scientists at the CDC, which reportedly detailed thimerosal's established safety record, that presentation was pulled by the Secretary's office.
So it wasn't presented.
Correct. Which suggests a very deliberate shaping of the information the panel actually got to see. And that, raises serious questions about transparency and, frankly, the scientific integrity of the whole process.
And on top of all that, the decision was made formal without the usual sign-off from the CDC director.
Because the post is currently vacant, right?
Exactly. President Trump's nominee, Susan Monarez, she's still waiting for Senate confirmation. So effectively, Secretary Kennedy is acting as the head of the CDC in this context.
Giving him direct authority over this decision, bypassing some of the usual checks and balances.
Yeah. So, okay, we've sifted through all these details, like controversy, the process. The big question now is, what does it all mean? For vaccine supply here, yes, but also critically, what are the global ripples?
Okay, domestically first. HHS, the Health and Human Services Department, they've put out assurances. They're saying this policy change will not disrupt the flu vaccine supply in the U.S. And vaccine makers have apparently confirmed they can replace the multi-dose vials containing thimerosal with alternatives, mostly single-dose ones.
So for the average person in the U.S. looking for a flu shot, the immediate impact should be minimal.
That seems to be the expectation. Although, capacity to replace doesn't necessarily mean zero cost or effort for the manufacturers. There will widely be costs involved in retooling, adjusting supply chains.
Right. It's not flicking a switch.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But then there's the global picture. And this is where it gets perhaps more complex.
Because Secretary Kennedy has been quite public about this, hasn't he? Urging other countries to follow suit.
He has. He said, with the U.S. now removing mercury from all vaccines, we urge global health authorities to follow this prudent example for the protection of children worldwide. That's a pretty clear signal.
A call to action, basically.
Definitely. And this brings up a really important point about global implications, especially around cost and logistics. Because while the U.S. supply seems okay, this decision could really complicate things globally, particularly for low and middle-income countries, LMICs.
Why specifically for them?
Because those multi-dose vials, the ones that often contain thimerosal, they're incredibly important for global health programs. They're just much, much cheaper per dose. And they also simplify the whole cold chain logistics. Fewer vials mean less storage space, less energy for refrigeration, which is huge in some settings, plus less waste. You can get multiple doses from one vial in a busy clinic.
Makes sense.
So if other countries feel pressured to follow the U.S. lead, if global manufacturing shifts away from multi-dose vials, the costs for immunization programs worldwide could go up significantly. Switching entirely to single-dose vials probably means higher prices per dose, bigger logistical headaches for storage and transport, potentially more vaccine waste too.
Which could impact access.
Exactly. It could hit vaccine equity and access hard,
Yeah.
especially in places where every dollar, every bit of efficiency really counts. So it stops being just a scientific debate and becomes a major economic and logistical challenge for global public health.
Wow. So this deep dive, it really shows this complex interplay, doesn't it? Public health policy, the science, political influence, all swirling around this one preservative. It's just such a powerful, real-world example of how public concern, even when it's not really backed by the science, can become this major force driving pretty huge policy changes.
Now, what really stands out is how a solid scientific safety profile can still get overshadowed, maybe even reshaped by years and years of public debate, targeted campaigns. And that leads to changes that genuinely impact how we do public health, not just nationally, but potentially on a huge global scale. I mean, the key insight here might be that in the public health arena, perception, especially when it's persistently fueled, can sometimes have more immediate policy clout than the established science.
Yes.
Which creates a really tough situation for maintaining public trust.
So for you listening, what's your take on all this? As we look ahead, vaccine confidence is just so crucial, isn't it? How do policy changes like this one, driven more by precaution, maybe public pressure, than by proven harm, how do they shape that bigger conversation about public health, about trust in science? I mean, ultimately, this isn't just a story about thimerosal, is it? It's kind of a stark illustration of how safety itself can become this battleground, shaped not just by data from labs, but by powerful narratives and political will. Is this a sensible step forward? Or does it risk sending confusing messages, maybe with unintended consequences for global vaccination efforts? Definitely something to think about as you navigate this world of, well, constantly evolving information.